Hi everyone, this is Dragon White. Welcome to Operator Hindsight. Unfortunately, I'll have to admit that I just can't keep up with the schedule, and I would not be able to guarantee the release of the series during the banner anymore. I'll see what I can do about that, but anyways, here's the episode for the Global 5th Anniversary Limited Pepe. Pepe is an Earthshaker in the Guard class. Trait of the Archetype, attack deal 50% of attack as AoE physical damage to enemies around the main target, with a splash radius of 1.0. They have a 1-tower attack range like many others in Guard. Taking a closer look at the stats build, they have the second highest attack stat in Guards behind Crushers, and the second longest attack interval at 1.8 seconds, also behind Crushers. Defensive-wise, I say they are slightly above or about average for max HP and defense within Guards. Some players may call this archetype the ground flanger. Well, in terms of being able to do true AoE damage, that's true, but there are also quite the differences. First of all, Earthshakers are actually single targeting, meaning that they are attacking one target with 100% of attack, then creating an AoE splash damage to all other targets in that range. That splash damage does 50% of attack and will not damage the main target. And this is very different from Flingers, because for Earthshakers, it's one instance of damage to all enemies. For Flingers, it's 2 or 3 instances of damage to all enemies, depending on whether they have a Flinger X module. So, are Earthshakers good for AoE? Yes. Are they good for damage instance mechanics? Not even as close. What's good though is that Earthshakers actually have high attack stats, so even when it's halved, the attack is still as good as Swarm Masters, and certainly better than the 800-ish from Flingers as well. Talent 1 for each enemy defeated during skill duration gains 1 SP after skill ends, up to a maximum of 14, 17 at potential 5. The way it works is the exact same as race skill 3, so don't worry about SP getting eaten. This is a very straightforward cycle improving talent. It works with her AoE nature, but the kill requirement is a bit too much. You don't get hundreds of enemies per stage. Yeah, sometimes there are mechanics that keep spawning in more enemies like the mutants, but oftentimes you'll realize that skill cycling isn't really that important when you're dealing with those enemies. Not to mention that there are a handful of approaches to settle those, so Pepe isn't building her advantage on this. In my opinion, as a cycle improvement, it really isn't as impactful as some notable and similar talents like Lin or Executor Alter's talent. Relying on kills is just not it, unless it can be clean and effective like Race Skill 3. So I'd say it's not very game changing. From the perspective of SP requirements, I say it works with Skill 1 and Skill 2 better to make fast cycle skills even faster. Talent 2, when deployed, all guard operators gain plus 16% attack, 20% at potential 3. The bonus is a multiplier increase calculated as direct multiplication, which means most of the attack plus some percent effect in kits. Now personally, I say this class buff talent has came a little bit too late. Nowadays, a competitive guard needs more than just big numbers. It is less impactful because many guard operators already have huge inherent multipliers in their own kit, including Pepe herself with her skills, so the 20% increase would be heavily diluted. Some of you might not quite get what diluted means. Basically, if you are giving a 20% multiplier to an operator without any, that's a 20% increase. But if you are giving it to an operator with, like, say 80%, then the improvement between plus 100% and plus 80% is just about 11%. So that's dilution. And unfortunately, this talent also requires Pepe's own field presence. We really need to appreciate the accessory approach that Bagpipe took from the start. Anyways, the guards that benefit relatively more from the talents are Swarm Masters like Dagenbrecher, or others with rather little or no attack multipliers in their kit like Chongyue and Zuole Skill 3. You may notice that I marked neither of her talents as core, which is a first in this series, because they feel arbitrary. They can be on any guards, they have no particular interactions with Pepe's skills or the Earthshaker archetype, which is a bit unfortunate. Next, let's talk about her module, which is fresh out of the oven and will be available on your next CNY Limited event. Trade update: when there are 3 or more enemies in splash range, increase the attack of that attack to 115%. It also applies to her AoE splash damage. Talent update goes to her talent 1. She now gets 2 SP for each kill during skill, and the maximum cap has been increased from 1417 to 1720. Let's talk about the base effect. It's a passive requirement because it really isn't something you can control or manipulate to ensure 3 enemies in a splash area. That said, it is a big damage scale, and it sets up for front-loaded damage, where you do more damage when there are more enemies, you lose the bonus when you kill some of them off, but that's the job done. So it's mostly for skill 3, which has a splash radius increase, and it further increases her DPH against the tough enemies she's looking for with that skill. For upgrades, depending on her potential, she now only needs 9 or 10 kills to reach the max SP cap as compared to 14 and 17 before. It is a welcomed improvement and bridges some of the difference brought by Potential 5, but honestly, cycling isn't a key problem for Pepe, and it doesn't make her super viable because of that. She's good at general lane holding, mob killing, and this module just makes her better where she's already good. Overall, if the base effect condition is met, the module provides some further increase to her DPH. It is a 24.3% damage increase, and that mostly comes from the level 1 base effect. When the base is not triggered, it will be just down to 8%. For practice, it makes her skill 2 cycle even faster if she can be fed that many enemies, or you can take advantage of level 1 to do more damage with skill 3. In conclusion, it is very optional for your daily experience. The damage part is mostly in level 1. For cycling, the budget pick is level 2, which doubles the SP per kill. Feel free to go further based on what you want from her and the resources you have. For skill recommendation, my take is skill 2 over skill 3 over skill 1. Skill 2 is the more daily applicable skill with a better range, faster cycles, and decent DPS. Skill 3 is actually her signature skill. It has high DPH, consistent stun towards the main target, and a slightly shorter one for splash targets in a big splash range. Unfortunately, the skill doesn't come with any range extension, which is detrimental to her viability. Skill 1 is supposed to be a countermeasure skill with status effect cleanse, but it's carried out pretty terribly. Skill 1, next attack deals 290% of attack as physical damage, can be used when affected by status effect and removing the status effect. Can store 2 charges. This is a 0/5 auto skill. Damage numbers are as followed: a pretty decent DPH but nothing special on the cycle DPS. As a side note, the module numbers here are always the optimal situation, with 3 enemies in splash range. For the mechanic, status effects that can be cleansed are the same ones that are described to be resistible, including stun, cold, freeze, which are the common ones, and things like the burning breath of Tallulah and various ability from some of the enemies in Invitation to Wine. The skill sounds interesting, but there are 2 major problems. 1, the status effect cleanse is a one-time thing, meaning that against consistent statuses, Pepe will basically be doing sit-ups and completely ineffective. Most notable cases are Saka's Bindcasters or the Crying Puppy in IS. The timings are also beyond your control, so sometimes it can miss the crucial window for the cleanse. It needs a target to be used, so for range statuses effect, she can't do anything. With that many issues, it just isn't reliable nor effective to be regarded as a countermeasure. On the other hand, if you only want this as an AFK skill, her DPH and DPS is just average, not to mention that we have just gotten LPNs last month, who left very little competition in this context. Overall, not recommended. Skill 2, attack range expands, attack plus 90%, attack speed plus 80, attacks random targets in range. Each time after activating the skill, subsequent activations gain an extra attack speed plus 40 up to 2 stacks. This is a 18/25 18-second skill. Skill range is the same as Gavior Altar Skill 2. It deals about 3000 DPH, same DPS on the first use, and about 4.2k to 5.2k DPS starting from the third use onwards, which is pretty okay, but do keep in mind that all of this gets a half off when they are towards secondary targets as splash damage. So, skill 2 is a short cycle skill, which is good on Pepe due to her SP talent. The random targeting of this skill is pretty new, as you all know 99% of the time, melee operators will prioritize enemies blocked by themselves. But for this skill, Pepe can actually target other units even when she's currently blocking someone. Pros for this is that she can evenly distribute her damage among all targets in range. Everyone gets to take some primary damage and splash damage, so that's a good thing when all the targets in range are of similar quality. Cons, on the other hand, it can lead to leaking enemies that she could have dealt with via normal targeting, or even herself being threatened by dangerous enemies who may be closer or being blocked by her. In practice though, for most lane holding cases, the pros weigh more because if you look at the diagram, the 1.0 splash radius covers the range pretty well, so it should work as intended most of the time. Another thing that sucks a little bit is the warm-up design. The first use starts with 0 stack. The full attack speed bonus is only active starting from the third use, which can take up to 90 plus seconds. This is made slightly more acceptable with Talent 1, especially with Module. Now, there's nothing too particular about the skill, it's all about lane holding. So I want to do a little comparison with Gavior Altar Skill 2, who served a very similar role back in the time. They have the same range and can do multi-target. Gavior has a 35 SP skill with a 40-second duration, so that compared to the short cycle Pepe Skill 2, actually has a higher coverage at 53%. I'm using the stats for both of them without module, and Gavior does have a higher total damage, a better survivability with some small crowd control as cherry on top. Pepe has the upper hand with DPS, faster cycle time so that she's less reliant on having to relay with other skills, and is theoretically better when there are tons more enemies. However, it does come with absolutely 0 survival bonus, a weird warm-up, and having the damage cut in half when splashing. So to conclude, and from my own experience, Pepe's Skill 2 feels like a side grade or a slight upgrade from Gavior Altar Skill 2, but not a complete upgrade, which is a bit concerning because Gavior Altar debuted in 2022 and peaked at the time, but we are looking at a post-Wizardel Arknights where standard lane holding as a job can be fulfilled one way or 100 others, and Gavior herself has been away from the spotlight for quite some time. So now let's take a look at Pepe's ultimate offer, Skill 3. Attack interval plus 0.2 second into 2 seconds. Attack plus 240%, attacks stuns the target for 0.8 seconds and increases to 1.5 seconds for the main target. After each attack, splash radius expands by 0.25 tiles, and additionally attack plus 25% up to 4 stacks. This is a 35/45 40-second skill. All the damage numbers are shown here, and we're looking at a DPH of 6.4k to 7.9k. So post-module, the damage on the main target is at the Alpianus/Wizardel Skill 3 level. That's more than impressive, meaning that even as halved of splash damage, it should still hurt quite a bit. The skill deals a total of 125k to 155k damage, with DPS up to 3.8k, even above Alpianus Skill 3. So as a damage skill, its quality already checks out. Now let's break it down a bit. Again, there is little ramp up to her attack pattern. The first attack starts with 0 stacks, and the splash radius and attack build up and peak at the 5th attack. We've talked about her DPH, just keep in mind that it cuts to about 3200 for splash targets. The splash radius at max is 2.0 tile, which is a bit shorter than Wizardel's whooping 2.5, but still very respectable. For reference, BaoUner's skill 3 Anchor Crush radius is 1.8 tile. And finally, we have the stun, which, to be honest, is a big part of Pepe's selling point. 2-second attack interval with a 1.5-second stun on main target means that she can stun lock enemies with attack startup animations longer than 0.5 seconds. The stun becomes more reliable with attack speed buffs or CC relics, which resembles Hodor's skill 2 a little. However, the skill comes with some major design problems that jeopardize its performance in practice. The biggest one being the lack of range. She still only has a 1 tile range in skill 3, and a negative loophole stems from this problem. Compared to splash targets, the main target she's attacking takes double the damage, so unless they are significantly tougher than the surrounding ones, Pepe would usually kill the main target before all others. And because she has a short attack range but a big stun range, when she's attacking a main target, it should give a harder time for surrounding enemies to get close to her. This is especially a thing against enemies' formations where there are targets in different roles. Anyhow, Pepe will lose the main target that she can knock at, which not only causes the loss of subsequent damage, and also her ability to the AoE stun. Less damage means less kills and less return from her talent 1, which then leads to a slower cycle. This problem in practice is extremely painful, and it sucks to see Pepe standing there idle, waiting for targets to get close. It is very easy to conclude this. Pepe's skill 3 is basically Wizardel's skill 3, but with only the 1 tile range. Just imagine if Wizardel can only hit targets right in front of her. That should be very visualizing. There are also some smaller problems, like having only a short stun for splash targets. It will make interrupting them less reliable. That plus her short range means that she's basically powerless against ranged enemies. As long as they don't step on that 1 tower in front of her, they'll be doing free damage and there's nothing Pepe can do about it. Finally, the lack of survival bonus. Stun lock is her only way to guarantee safety when dueling enemies, so she's also very vulnerable if the target is stun immune. So all that together kinda narrows down the skill 3's use scenario drastically. She'll need a tough, worthy opponent to knock at, and that target should also be susceptible to stun. So, how do we better utilize skill 3? My suggestion is finding choke points in maps for her. That way she has more targets to attack and hits more target per attack. If you're expecting tough enemies that skill 3 cannot stun lock, try to have Pepe stand sideways and block the main target with a more durable unit. Overall, bring the fight to your targets instead of letting them get to you. Pepe loves to keep knocking at something. Now, a fairly popular take about how to improve Pepe's skill 3 is allowing her to keep attacking without a main target, and people then propose the stainless skill 3 synergy where a turret is placed so that Pepe can keep knocking at something. Well, I say that's doable, but it also has its own flaws. That is, if Pepe doesn't pick up an actual enemies, she's just doing splash damage to everyone, and that's a half off to all the damage. It becomes a skill with 3.2k DPH, 62k damage, and about 1.5k DPS, which is about the same DPH as Chen Alter, but only half the damage and DPS. So damage-wise, this combo is using 2 operators to do the job of half another operator. So that certainly is not a synergy. 1 hit every 2 seconds is also not efficient at triggering the turret. So the merit of this combo is mostly for achieving the AoE stun splash, taking out some mobs that run by. But instead of putting the turret right in front of her, you can instead place them next to the 1 tile to create condition for triggering the module base effect, as the turrets are regarded as a splash target. Overall, this skill is used in lane holding that involves tough enemies in large amount, or elite and boss enemies that come along with mob waves. The 45 SP skill means that she may need to relay with other skills in some extent. Stun lock is pretty obvious, a stat stick that can serve as a dummy would be the best, and that is part of her strength in lane holding. To conclude, Pepe is a 6-star lane holder that comes with a lot of add-ons, first being her talents. Honestly, they feel kinda arbitrary, just some random KOL without good interactions with a kid. but her talent 1 is pretty okay after module. Skill 1 to 3 basically gives her different options to play with. Skill 1 is used in scenarios with medium level of frequent status effects or in AFK. Skill 2 comes with extended range and fast cycling. Skill 3 is for higher quality enemy waves or even dueling with stunlock. She's pretty good against waves of big number of mobs or stun-prone defensive enemies. However, her promising numbers are eventually all that she's got, and her lack of extra mechanics is what limited her potential in this meta. Overall, her function as well as game presence is quite similar to Gavial Altar, as we compared earlier as melee lane holders. And unfortunately, that would mean that Pepe hasn't been that relevant since her debut. She's pretty good in RA because all the waves of enemies, but I hate to break it to you, the game mode is kinda everyone's game at this point. High quantity of enemies, yes, but not so much on quality. She fares slightly better in buff game modes where she can find buffs to her stun time or attack speed, which makes her stun locks more reliable. But again, her main problem, lack of range, is not something that can be easily solved. Eventually, I decided to give her a daily rating of 6. Despite all the criticism, Pepe is a very serviceable lane holder. With proper sustain, she can do her job in daily with no problem. Damage with skill 2 is pretty enough for most enemies, and it comes with quite comfortable cycling. Unfortunately, her signature skill, skill 3, can get frustrating to use in daily. It's an overkill for mobs and can miss a lot of potential damage due to the short of range, which results in a longer downtime. Other than that, this skill is still good in favorite matchups and is unique in guards or even melee operators. But let's not ignore the elephant in the room. Most of its potential is overshadowed by the existence of Viscidel. Next we have 5 for advanced rating. Her key offer is the large area AoE stun, high DPH and consistent stun lock towards the main target with skill 3. It works pretty well with additional bonuses from buff game modes, but again, she still suffers from the lack of range. In Contingency Contract, her biggest chance is to deal with high threat melee enemies that are prone to stun, much like Holderer, except that she stands a higher chance to actually take out these enemies with consistent stun and high attack stat that is more resilient against attack debuffs. Overall, good numbers on damage, but the talents really doesn't help her out too much in advanced contents. So, should you pull or build her? Overall, I say her damage is great, her stun lock has potential, and that's it. If you are not too rushed on getting more lane holders, she's just okay. For gameplay, I have to say that if you're a new player with limited lane holding options, especially if you start on this banner, Pepe will be perfect as a early game babysitter. She's solid even in E1 with skill 2 for lane holding. For more experienced players, you may value her ability as a melee unit to do consistent stun and AoE damage to enemies in a large area. But you should be aware of her lack of range, which is devastating to her performance. For schedule and meta, she's limited after all, and I predict that if one day we need someone else other than Viscidel to deal with static enemies present in a large amount, maybe we will see a resurgence of Pepe's relevance. That aside, she's still very replaceable in daily content for lane holding. To put it straight, I think the 2 previous 6-star, Albienus and Viscidel, has eliminated most of the competition in this race, and Pepe's release timing is honestly very bad. That's gonna be it for this episode. I did a little reformat for this rating preview section to better summarize the key problems of upcoming operators. But overall, the ratings can still change until they're released, like Pepe in this episode. It's gonna be the CNY after this episode, and I'll be home for the holiday. So unfortunately, the episode for Narantuya will not be here before the banner ends. I apologize for letting you guys down and hope you can understand. A late Happy New Year for all of you, or an early Happy Chinese New Year. Thank you all for watching until the end. See you in the next one. Bye bye.